Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. My name is Sahar Khan, and I'm a research associate at the Liver Forum. Thank you so much for joining this community conversation where we've decided to call this Patients Leading the Way, How PEDDLE is Shaping the Future of MASH Trials. I'd first like to provide an overview of our agenda for this community conversation. First, I will be providing an overview of the Liver Forum. Then we'll go to Mike Patel, who will provide an overview of patient engagement. And then we'll hear about the value of patient engagement and the MASH Power Council from Rosemary Salati from Regeneron, as well as patient engagement at Madrigal from Chris Frades. And then we'll get to move to talk about patient engagement in the regulatory context, and lastly, what PEDDLE is doing with all of this information in mind. So first, I'm going to provide an overview of the Liver Forum. My name is Sahar Khan. I am a research associate at the Liver Forum, where we, do the following. The Forum for Collaborative Research is a public and private partnership and part of the UC Berkeley School of Public Health, where we've addressed cutting-edge regulatory science and policy issues for over 20 years through a process of stakeholder engagement and deliberation. We do this in a variety of different disease areas, including MASH and MASLD, HIV, hepatitis B, transplant-associated viral infections, and ocular diseases. The Liver Forum specifically is a platform for ongoing multi-stakeholder dialogue to identify the barriers, prioritize research, and identify solutions to accelerate therapeutic development for MASLD and MASH. We do this by providing a neutral, independent, safe space for discussion across multiple stakeholder groups. This includes regulatory agencies such as the FDA and European Medicines Agency, professional societies such as AASLD and EASL, academic and clinical researchers, foundations and consortia such as NIMBLE and Litmus, patients and community members, and industry partners. What we want to do is focus on developing consensus, increasing synergy and collaboration, and reducing duplication and uncertainty. The Liver Forum does this by having larger project events throughout the year, twice yearly, in forum meetings that are usually about a day or two long. And then we have ongoing working group activity throughout the year focused on key issues. And what we really value is active and engaged participation from our different stakeholders. The Liver Forum is governed by a steering committee, which is representative of these different stakeholder groups, and we're supported by different sponsors as well. The forum, I'm so grateful to have an amazing team. Our director is Veronica Miller, who is also faculty at UC Berkeley School of Public Health, and we have some incredible research associates. This includes Mitchell Leus and Ekene Sakwe, who focus on the Hepatitis B Forum project, Edith Dwyer, who works on the PSC Forum project, as well as our Liver Forum focused on MASLD and MASH. We have an incredible data and analysis center, as well as program advisors that assist us. Specifically here in the Liver Forum, I'd like to highlight Richard Haubrick and our incredible student assistants that are amazing undergraduates at UC Berkeley, including Kathy Ann, Alessi Ivaz, and Allison Lee, who make everything possible. So as I had mentioned earlier, the Liver Forum has ongoing working group efforts to address key issues concerning the regulatory path for MASLD and MASH. This includes our combination therapy working group, patient engagement in drug development, leading through example, the amazing PEDDLE group here, pediatric MASH, pooling of endpoints across clinical trials, focusing on F3 and F4 clinical trials, a MET-ALD working group, as well as a non-invasive test for a reasonably likely surrogate endpoint working group. So what is PEDDLE exactly? Well, PEDDLE was launched at Liver Forum 17 on September 4th in 2024. And what we aim to do is put patients at the core of MASH clinical development. And we want to do is assess the current landscape of patient engagement, discuss common hurdles with industry and other patient stakeholders, and establish touch points with regulators. And as you can see, this is a lovely photo from our first PEDDLE panel at Liver Forum 17. Now I'm going to pass this over to Mike Patel, who's going to talk about patient engagement.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. I'm Michael Battelle. I'm the president and founder of the Fatty Liver Alliance and proud member of PEDDLE the working group. And so thank you for coming today. We're going to talk about patient engagement. And if you can hit the next slide, please. What a great way to start by actually defining it. And so it took a little time to find a really great definition, but so I'm going to read this because I think it was so good. And this is from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. So, patient engagement is the meaningful involvement of patients, caregivers, and the healthcare community at large throughout the research process, from planning and design to implementation and dissemination of results. This engagement ensures that the perspectives and experiences of patients drive research priorities, study design, and outcomes. I love that. I couldn't think of anything to add to that. And so I thought it would be a really good time to share that. Okay, next slide. So just in the next couple minutes, I want to talk to you about these four examples. So we're trying to think, what is patient engagement? These are things that are being done for the most part. And in time, we're going to come up with ones that haven't been done yet. So we're going to talk about the real world, an example of lifestyle integration as an example, mental health, behavioral support, invasive procedures, non-invasive procedures, and also just the importance of diversity in mass trials. Okay, next slide. So the first one is this real world symptom tracking lifestyle integration. And there are a lot of just I'll call them symptoms, but of liver disease. And people say, well, no, liver is a silent disease. But in fact, patients are experiencing a lot and there's physical and mental, which we'll talk about too. But it's really important to listen to the patients before and during clinical trials to understand some of the things that are like that baseline. What are they experiencing as part of their disease burden? And of course, they're going to be tracked during clinical trials too. But this was an example, and setting up some system tracking to be able to record what's happening, especially with when the n size of studies increases as well. Okay, next slide. The second is about mental health and behavioral support. And again, it was probably for the most part because of feedback that patients have given during clinical trials, and they are already experiencing stress and anxiety with their disease, let alone being part of a clinical trial and feeling pressured for the expectations that they have to manage, being on time, showing up, and all the other things they deal with, and all the lifestyle changes that they are struggling with on a day-to-day basis. So the behavioral support, and I've also often said that patients, even in the control arms, are actually getting better behavioral support than patients in the community. And so it really just shows you this is something that we have to continue to take into account. Next slide. So invasive procedures, who wants them? Nobody. And it was probably a lot due to the loud voice of patients who have said, why are you poking me, stabbing me, and hurting my liver and me when there are non-invasive options available? And so, of course, the fiber scan and blood biomarkers and MRI PDFF, when it's available in the clinical trials, are things that we're trying to move more towards. And eventually we'll have hopefully all clinical trials without doing biopsies. But it was this really hate for the biopsy that is causing the love for non-invasive procedures. Okay, and the last one. The next one, yeah, is about diverse representation. And so, yes, we always talk about diversity, cultural diversity, geographic diversity. There's even diversity when you look at some of the disease states, so type 2 diabetes and patients struggling with obesity. And there's different subcategories even within those. And so we really need to take into account that patients are individuals, and as much as possible, at least when creating the study design, that we take into account that patients are not just dots in a study; they're actually people and families involved. Next. And so my last slide in this part is looking at things that we might be able to do together with practical strategies. So first, we could have these steering committees and advisory boards, and they're already happening in some cases because we've all been part of them. The materials that patients have to engage with, make sure that from a language perspective, a cultural perspective, that there are things that can be used and also understood. Incorporating tools and technology, there's lots of those available now too. Recognizing and addressing the health language barriers, which are really important. And also sharing the trial results with participants and making sure that they understand what they're in for and what's going to happen. Like, for example, are they going to have an opportunity to get an active drug at some point too? So, and that's it, Sarah, for this part.
So thank you, Mike. That was fantastic. For the audience, my name is Rose Salati. I'm with Regeneron, and I'm the patient advocacy lead for our MASH portfolio. I am also one of the proud co-chairs of the PEDDLE working group. And what I thought I'd do is share a little bit more about the history of patient engagement and the value of early patient engagement, as well as a specific example that we have from Regeneron. So next slide. So just really quickly, the expectation for patients to actively engage in the drug discovery process, it's been steadily growing since the early 1980s, when AIDS activists really demanded resources for research and for treatment that was for then a fatal disease. And this movement really laid the groundwork for true advocacy organizations which champion patients' rights, education, research, as well as quality measures for testing. And over time, you'll see that the expectation to include patients as partners really expanded to other therapeutic areas and prompted health authorities and payers and the industry to really recognize the value of systematic patient engagement in drug development. So in 2012, the FDA actually launched a program called Patient-Focused Drug Development. It was an initiative to really ensure that patients' experiences and their perspectives and their priorities were integrated into drug development. So between 2013 and 2017, the FDA conducted 24 disease-specific PFDD meetings to gather patient input on their treatment experiences and their preferences. And these efforts continue today. Patient organizations are supported in creating what they call the Voice of the Patient reports, which detail unmet needs, patient burdens, and preferences for treatments and clinical trials. And these reports have become critical tools for shaping clinical strategies in industry. More recently, the FDA has finalized a guidance on diversity and inclusion in clinical development, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Henry. And lastly, I want to highlight that there are organizations like PCORI, which you heard about from Mike, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and the European counterpart, the European Patients Academy for Therapeutic Innovation, that have developed guidance and training programs to integrate patient engagement into drug development. These programs certify patients as patient experts and patient ambassadors, equipping them with the knowledge about research and clinical development so they can serve as consultants and serve as members of trial steering committees. And this allows us in the industry to really work with the community to advance our programs in a more patient-centric way. So on the next slide, while regulators and payers and industry were increasingly recognizing the importance of engaging with patients in clinical development, many in the industry were a little hesitant to move forward beyond pilot programs because of this uncertainty of the value of the investment. There's a very precedented publication from the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative that provided very compelling evidence on the value of patient engagement. They used data from oncology programs in phase 2 and phase 3 at companies like J&J, Janssen, and Pfizer, and they evaluated the financial impact of a modest investment of $100,000 in patient engagement activities at avoiding protocol amendments. They used a very fancy risk-adjusted model to determine that there was a cost savings of $535,000 per amendment in phase 3, faster recruitment and approval times by 3 months, and a total financial impact of up to $65 million when you factored in cost savings and reclaimed revenue. So these activities that they reference as patient engagement activities, they could include surveys, interviews, advisory boards, but the intent is really to identify barriers to recruitment and retention early, right? So saving time and money and really facilitating some of these programs to move more quickly. So on the next slide, so what are we doing at Regeneron? We have a number of assets that are in research and clinical development for MASH. And we recognized very early on that this disease we're targeting is incredibly complex and that there are real challenges when it comes to reaching and supporting patients, especially in Hispanic and Latino communities where we know MASLD and MASH are more prevalent. So to better understand that patient journey that patients and their families face, we established a council. Everybody on the council gelled very quickly, and they coined themselves as the Power Council, patient organizations who empower results. And we really are working with this council to make sure that all of these community voices are helping us appreciate and realize some of the day-to-day challenges that patients face, as well as the unmet need and the patient burden of living with this disease. So together, we have mapped the patient journey from symptomology through diagnosis and disease management. We worked with the council to identify barriers to accessing clinical trials, especially for those in the rural and underserved areas. And we worked with this council hand in hand to create meaningful resources, including this patient journey map, which we consider validated by the patient community. We developed an interactive infographic that we use to educate others internally and externally about this journey. A lot of videos, patient videos, where patients are sharing their stories about their journey, and really developing some patient-friendly information about the trial experience as well as our trial specifically. And I think for me, just as important, this work has really deepened our relationships with patients, with caregivers, with the broader community by ensuring that their voices are heard and guiding our efforts in clinical development. So we are very excited to continue the collaboration by publishing some of our findings alongside these advocates and really ensuring that we're advancing the field of study in a very data-driven way. And on the next slide, just very quickly, through our work with the MASH Power Council, we did uncover some key insights that are helping us better engage with Hispanics and Latino community. We learned that, this silent nature of the disease often leads to this lack of urgency to seek treatments. There is a gap in communication between physicians and patients that can further delay that care. Many patients are also unaware of clinical trial opportunities, which in some cases can serve as a treatment option. And we found that patient organizations were really that gateway for providing this education about the disease, as well as for clinical trial opportunities. And then you can also see on this slide that we identified a significant mistrust, really due to the history of mistreatment in healthcare. Along with this perception that pharma and healthcare providers are maybe outsiders. So we learned that we really needed to build trust and foster meaningful engagement, and that it was critical to work with trusted community members within the community to really develop that initial trust and share these opportunities more broadly. We are working very hard with the council to make sure that all of our materials are culturally sensitive, to make sure that they are reaching and impacting and speaking to the communities that we're trying to reach. And then on the last slide here, we were committed to working very closely with patients, with caregivers, with advocates in a meaningful way, hence me being part of this PEDDLE working group. And we're looking forward to continuing to work with this MASH Power Council to advance some of the assets that we have in our portfolio, ultimately to add to more treatments for the community. And I will pass it on to my colleague at Madrigal, Chris Frates.
Thanks so much, Rose, and thanks to the Liver Forum, the PEDDLE Working Group for inviting me to say a few words here. If we go to the next slides. My name's Chris Frates. I'm the head of corporate communications and patient advocacy at Madrigal. And Madrigal's a biopharmaceutical company focused on delivering novel therapeutics for MASH. We developed the first medication for non-cirrhotic MASH with moderate to advanced fibrosis, the first medication to receive accelerated approval from the FDA. And we do a ton of work with the patient advocacy community, really hoping to gather insights from them, gather inspiration, and partner with them on disease education for the community. And what you see on the right side of this slide are some pictures from a patient summit that we did over the summer to gather some thinking from the community on what the future of NASH patient care should look like in the year 2030. We go to the next slide. Just before the start of this liver meeting, we actually hosted a little bit over 80 patient advocates, caregivers, and professionals from the community in a listening session that focused heavily on research priorities for the patient community. So we're very interested in understanding what new clinical studies the patient community might want to see, how they want to be treated in clinical trials, what are some of the gaps in research. And on the next slide, we'll see a few of the findings from this discussion. On the right, you actually see these are some visual notes that were done in real time during the meeting. So here's what we heard from the patient advocates. Want to have input early into trial design, into clinical development programs, even into some of the educational materials that we invest so much in to reach patients. As you heard from Mike, there's a real desire to move away from biopsy in phase 2 and phase 3 trials and really start to embrace non-invasive testing and really advance that testing, not only in the clinical trial setting, but in clinical practice as well. Of course, improving diversity in clinical trials. We spent a lot of time talking about what it means to really go to underserved communities. And that can be both in rural settings, but also urban settings. Having cultural competency with the study staff, we're reaching out to those communities, really important, and certainly something that we need to do a much better job at if you look at the populations in some of the major phase 2 and phase 3 trials in MASH. And of course, one of the things that came up actually in the context of diversity was the pediatric MASH population. A lot of the groups that we work with are, in the communities, engaging with school systems, seeing a lot of kids who have very high risk for a MASLD and MASH, and really want to see a much faster path to clinical research in the pediatric MASH population and ultimately approved therapies. We go to the next slide. This is just a little perspective from me, from an industry perspective, working in companies in a patient advocacy role. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that I think we face? When it comes to the patient voice in clinical research, I think the patient input is really valued, but the process for collecting it isn't always standardized at many companies, especially smaller companies, biotech companies, biopharma companies that don't have a lot of resources, and many times are just really struggling to get their trials off the ground. So what's the opportunity? I think PEDDLE will help solve for some of this. Maybe it's a toolkit to define how and when to collect patient input on a development program. So what are some of the kind of core standards that should be consistent across companies and programs? Another challenge, I would say, and this is something I've observed quite a lot over the course of my career, is that the patient advocacy function may not really exist at some of the smaller companies who are doing really important research in a disease like MASH. And in larger companies, it might be siloed. There might be a bit of a perception that patient advocacy is about bringing patients to a major meeting to deliver kind of an inspiring talk or participating in, a charity walk. And of course, those are very important things. But I think we need to build a much more expansive understanding of patient advocacy's role in biopharma. And I think Rose's presentation was just a perfect snapshot of what that can look like. Another challenge, I think, that's very much on my mind at a meeting like the liver meeting here. It's hard for many patients to attend conferences like the liver meeting due to the cost of travel. This is a great, place for patients to be present and to understand what some of the latest research and what role they can play and kind of understanding that so they can provide more informed input. And I think the opportunity here is to establish some grants, some scholarships to support a larger patient presence at medical meetings. And maybe in the future, instead of doing an event like this kind of over Zoom, we can all be present in the meeting, meeting face to face and engaging with some of the healthcare providers who really need to hear this on site at the meeting. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Henry to talk about patient engagement in the regulatory context.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next slide, please. So good day, everyone. My name is Henry Chang, and I am privileged to serve as the co-chair of the PEDDLE working group and the executive director of the Fatty Liver Foundation. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge a quick technical issue. My computer isn't detecting my camera today, so I hope you'll excuse this hiccup and bear with me during the presentation. So today I'll share how patient engagement is transforming the regulatory landscape in MASH clinical trials. Patient involvement is no longer a nice to have, it's a necessity, bring unique insights into trial design and addressing gaps that might otherwise hinder progress. Through collaboration, as you heard, we're defining how trials are designed, executed, and evaluated, ensuring that they're more patient-centered and aligned with regulatory goals. So over the next few minutes, I'll outline how this engagement directly impacts trial outcomes and regulatory compliance. So on this slide, let's start with co-creation. This really involves patients and advocates working alongside with study sponsor from the earliest stage of protocol development. And that could often be from phase 2B and phase 3 trials. So what does this mean in real practice? Patients provide feedback that shapes the structure of the trials. They advocate for changes that reduce burdens, such as replacing, as you heard before, invasive liver biopsies with non-invasive diagnostic tools, such as imaging or biomarkers. This is not just about convenience, it's about improving the patient experience, reducing dropout rates, and ensuring ethical alignment with patient needs. Imagine a trial where patients have to travel long distances frequently or endure uncomfortable procedures. They're far less likely to stay engaged. Patient input highlights these pain points and provides practical solutions, such as optimizing visit schedules or addressing transportation challenges. The FDA actively encourages these patient-focused approaches, which are critical to improving trial outcomes and aligning with broader goals of patient-centered drug development. Next slide, please. So let's talk about diversity. This is something that Mike had brought up earlier. Diversity really is a cornerstone of modern clinical trials. MASH, as you heard also earlier, disproportionately impacts underrepresented populations, including Hispanics, Latino, Latin American, Native American, Asian Americans, and African American communities. Yet these groups are often underrepresented in trials. Why is this? So barriers like cultural misconceptions, lack of trust in healthcare systems, or logistical challenges can discourage participation. This is where diversity action plans, or DAPs, come in. Patients and advocates collaborate with sponsors to co-develop these plans, addressing the specific barriers faced by underrepresented groups. whether it's ensuring cultural appropriateness in outreach materials that Rose spoke about, or offering solutions for real-world challenges like childcare and transportation. DAPs create pathway for inclusion. These efforts align with the Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act, also known as FDORA of 2022, which mandates DAPs in clinical trials. Meeting these regulatory requirements not only ensure compliance, but also enhances the credibility of trial data by making it more representative of the diverse populations impacted by MASH or MASH. Next slide, please. So diversity isn't just about having the right plans on paper. It's about engaging communities directly. Advocacy groups can play a vital role here, acting as bridges between research teams and underrepresented populations. Through community outreach, we can build trust and dispel common misconceptions about clinical trials. For instance, some community may fear exploitation or lack of understanding of the benefit of participation. So education initiatives here are key to overcoming these challenges. By partnering with trusted community leaders or organizations, we can foster a sense of ownership and inclusion. This isn't just about beneficial for enrollment numbers, for example, it's about making people feel they have a stake in the research process, which in turn enhances retention. So from a regulatory perspective, this kind of engagement strengthens trial data, ensuring it's robust enough to support FDA reviews and approvals. Inclusive trials ultimately produce better therapies for everyone. Next slide. So finally, let's address enrollment. Setting realistic and culturally appropriate enrollment goals is critical. This is another area where patient advocates provide invaluable input. They help sponsors identify barriers that might be invisible to researchers. For example, language barriers, lack of transportation, or even the need for childcare. These factors make or break a trial's ability to meet its diversity targets. For example, if a recruitment goal assumes participants can easily take time off from work or travel long distances, it's likely to fail. By incorporating patient feedback, sponsors can create plans that are actionable and practical. This not only ensures enrollment targets are met, but also strengthens the FDA compliance to diversity action plans. When trials succeed in recruiting diverse populations, the outcomes are more applicable to real-world populations, and this creates a stronger foundation for regulatory approval and market success. So to sum up, I believe this is my last slide. Patient engagement in MASH trial, it's about much more than meeting quotas or ticking regulatory boxes. It's about transforming the entire process, making trials more inclusive, practical, and aligned with the needs of those they aim to serve. Through initiatives like co-creating protocols, developing inclusive diversity action plans, and fostering trust through community outreach, we're paving the way for more effective treatment and equitable health solutions. So to wrap up, I would just encourage all of us to view patient engagement as a cornerstone of innovation in MASH drug development. Together, we can ensure these efforts are not just meaningful, but transformative. So thank you again. I look forward to your questions. Now I will turn it back to Sahir.
Nope, me.
Oh, to Mike.
So I'll turn it over to Sahir. So just let's just looking forward to next steps and where we're going to go. So Sahir, if you can go to the next slide. AI generated, looks pretty cool, right? So this is all of us working together. There's the liver, we have to work together so that we can, and just some suggestions here to start with, but establishing a regular working group kind of meeting cadence where we can collaborate and come up with some deliverables. Secondly, would be to develop and promote a consensus so that we're all saying the same thing and have a unified stance. It's really important to do that too, and I think that we can get there. Third one is to link patient engagement to the scientific and economic outcomes. And so we saw a little bit of that today that Rose shared as well. And so it would be really good to make sure that we can include in that and build that body of evidence that we're going to, that we can share. And the last one is to create tangible deliverables for stakeholders, so we can start to get some stuff into the literature. Maybe we can get things published too, and just to raise that the voice of importance of some of the things that we can come up with together as a team. And so, Sarah, I don't know if you. And I'll just say before we go, thank you everybody for coming today, and for my colleagues for sharing such insightful information as well.
Thank you so much, Mike. You got to the thank you before I did. So
We can both say thank you.
we can all say thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Now I'd like to, give some time for everyone to ask any questions. So anyone here on the Zoom, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Otherwise, I can start off with a question for everybody else, if you guys don't mind. But I guess Mike and Henry, what are some key differences that you're seeing in your interactions with stakeholders at this liver meeting, regarding patient engagement and openness to hearing the patient voice in their clinical trials? So what's the difference that you're seeing, or
Ye-
opportunity?
Henry, who's going? Okay, I'll go. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that there's been quite a sea change. I've been coming to the liver meeting for the past 6 or 7 years. I think a lot of it also due to the fact that we now finally have a FDA approved treatment on the market. Many of the study sponsors or developers of novel therapies are becoming much more proactive in seeking patient input on their phase 2 and phase 3 trial design. So that's been my experience. I'm sure that Mike can share his thoughts as well.
Well, I totally agree with you. And in fact, like I just came from the poster hall, and we had a poster accepted that was all about patients involvement in clinical trials too. And being a part of the panels, and it's crazy, and appreciated that the difference between what it used to be and where we're heading to. So thank you to ASLD for including us as well.
Couldn't agree more. Rose and Chris, so in your experience in the last couple, years, what are some changes that you're seeing? What are some really exciting opportunities that you're seeing on your end?
You want me to go first, Chris?
Sure, Rose.
So I've been in this industry for 30 years. I'm a scientist by training. I spent 15 years doing basic research in drug development before speaking to a patient that had the diseases I was doing research on. And it was a very, very eye-opening experience for me, humbling, but eye-opening in terms of everything that I needed to appreciate about these diseases to do my job in research and development that much more effectively and efficiently. I've been doing patient engagement and stakeholder relations for about 15 years, and I've worked in a lot of therapeutic areas, and I have seen an evolution of companies starting with the commercial products where you can have a direct link to revenue coming into the company. But more and more, we're seeing companies, including Madrigal and Regeneron and other companies, not only invest in advocacy on those branded products, but really pulling it to the left of the regulatory finish line and working with patients to refine protocols and refine recruitment strategies. Everything that we touched on here is critical to our success as a community in advancing these medicines. So I think it's going to take all of us continuing to work together. But over the past 15 years, I've seen an evolution in the right direction.
I was just kind of reflecting at this meeting, how far things have come in MASH specifically with regards to just the MASH patient advocacy presence overall. I think I organized like an early roundtable meeting with patient advocates at the 2017 liver meeting. And we were all kind of looking around, almost like a little bit confused. Who are you? Who are you? And it was a very small roundtable. It was about 10 people, and half of them were actually providers. There just wasn't a large patient community. There wasn't a large patient presence at the meeting yet. And kudos to AASLD for really kind of advancing a lot more patient sessions, a lot more patient programming at these meetings. And I think it's just like there's so much more that we can do in the future. And I feel like we're on the right trajectory. So events like this, sessions like this, I think are just evidence that the hepatology community and in MASH specifically, there's a real desire to hear from patients, to incorporate the patient voice. I think the big question for a lot of us is kind of like the how. And that's why it's exciting that PEDDLE is starting up to provide some direction and some standards and some insight on the how do we do this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'd like to, thank everybody here for attending, and thank you, Henry, Mike, Rose, for your leadership. Thank you, Chris, for being willing to share with us, and thank you, Tiffany, for putting this together. Yes, thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your AASLD liver meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.